And welcome to the Wolfie Show, the Schnitzel Show. Tonight's guest is Wolf himself.
Well, okay, let's start. Hey, welcome, Kimbrough Moore, on the show today. I mean, we have like 9 hours time difference because, Kimbrough, you are in San Francisco at the moment, aren't you? Or where are you at the
Yes, I
moment?
am. Yeah, California. I love it here.
I don't doubt it because, at the moment, the last few weeks in Germany have been absolutely horrendous. We had mist, rain, and the winter approaching. What's the weather doing over there? Let's start with that at the moment.
It's perfect, like it almost always is. It's starting to get kind of cool. We had our first rain, but really, it's just wonderful. It's like that perfect fall temp.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I'm glad you're somewhere where the sun keeps shining. Yeah, just a quick info about Kimbrough. He's a professor at the State University of San Francisco in philosophy and computer science. Is it IT?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really happy to have you on the show today, because you have an Instagram account and you are quite active, I have to say, in regards to posing questions other people either don't think about, don't dare, don't want to do it. And, first of all, I would like to talk to you about your bouldering guide you made a few years back, because you're also an author, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. I've written three bouldering guides now with co-authors. They're wonderful. I like the collaborative process. But one for Yosemite Valley, the Bay Area, and also a climbing area in Southern California called Black Mountain.
Okay, and that's mainly bouldering, and it's like a bouldering topo climbing guide.
Yeah, they're all bouldering.
Is that your kind of cup of tea? You're really into you really like bouldering? Is that your style?
Um, Recently, yeah, but historically, no. I was sport climbing for and trad climbing for 15 years before I started bouldering. I've been climbing my whole life. I started when I was 5, so I actually don't remember my first time climbing. It's kind of always been there for me.
What does make bouldering to you appealable? What do you like about bouldering?
I like the diversity of movement. Um, they're like I think of them kind of like poems, uh, as opposed to I don't know a route which might be more like a novel. And it's just these little bite-sized experimentations and movements like that. I also, as I've always valued my autonomy, so being able to just like decide to go climbing and then hop in my car and not have to coordinate with anybody else and go out there and be by myself in the boulders. It's just a magical experience.
So it's really a way of like being flexible and just using the best out of your precious time, I guess, when you're also teaching as a professor. Yeah.
Yeah, I find I have less time as I get older. I don't know why that's the case, but it just seems like my free time becomes more and more precious.
Yeah, there's a funny saying in Germany. My mom always says like the pensioners in Germany, they don't have any time. They have less time than when they were working.
I feel it.
I guess it's the approach of death, and the ultimate understanding that infinity is just an illusion, and then time is getting scarce, so you just try to squeeze in as much as you can before you kind of like kick the bucket.
I know. We've only got what, like, I don't know, 85 years in this world. And I often, and when I'm doing something, I think, like, is this what I want to spend my precious hours doing? This is often when I'm grading papers or doing dishes or something. I try to make peace with with dishes because they're unavoidable, and there's no, if I can enjoy the dishes, I'll have just as many dishes, but like just a lot more joy. Um, but
Yeah,
still,
but
it's not exactly what I want to be doing with the like little bit of time that I have on this earth.
yeah, but I guess that's sometimes just the cookie, how the cookie crumbles. I guess grading can be done fast and thorough.
Yeah.
The question is who benefits from it. But anyways, let's dive into it. I got actually attracted to your Instagram account because you posed a question about grading, and you discussed a little bit about grading can be subjective. Can you just kind of expand on that in regards to climbing grades and how hard a route should be or that stuff?
Yeah, before I was talking about grading papers. No, climbing grades I find a lot more fun actually because it involves the actual climbing part of it. Here's my view on grades after having written multiple guides and kind of like been in the weeds doing it. Um, is that most of our grades today have a gender bias towards your like average like male body. um, and it's not like it's not so it's just more accurate for people like me. I've got that kind of like very very average like climber male body, and not like I mean not it's not average as far as all people go because I'm very athletic. I used to be a competitive rock climber. I've been climbing my whole life, but the shape, the morphology, my height, um, my hand size, all that is pretty standard. Uh, uh, so climbing grades were kind of developed by men. So I don't actually know all the history of the like European rating scale. So I'm going to talk about the US scales, but I think everything I'm going to say applies to the font scale and the French sports scale and the UIAA scale as well. So in the US, we have the Yosemite decimal system like 510, 511, and the V scale, V1, V2, V3, up to V17 now. So these scales are developed by men. The first of every grade was done by a man. Um, my research is into climbing guides has found that men write the vast majority of climbing guides. It kind of there's no like comprehensive list of guides, but depending on kind of which retail you look and kind of which time span you look at, we're still talking 93% or more. The largest retailer in the U.S. for outdoor gear is called REI. Anyone who's been on a climbing trip to the U.S. probably knows REI. And currently, they don't sell any guidebooks written by a woman. So men are writing, they're creating the scales. They're kind of setting the benchmarks of each grade. They are writing the guidebooks, or literally the ones who write it down. And also, most first ascents are done by men. I've looked at first ascents of boulder problems in California, and in total, we've got 96 to 99%, depending on kind of how you crunch the numbers of boulder problems were FA'd by men. So again, the kind of first proposed grade for each problem is done by a man. So kind of out of this, like kind of very like these like social facts, you get a grading scale that really prioritizes some bodies more than others. And which bodies? Well, it's your average male body because the grading is mostly done by men.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't hit me as a surprise, but I'm glad you're mentioning these facts because in a way that's never been really discussed. I mean, I sometimes also look into kind of like American or English speaking media, like climbing magazine online and stuff, and there hasn't been that much discussion going on. I mean, there's been discussion about kind of like diversity and how to get like people of color into the sport or people who are kind of like not mainstream or like not the people who have got access to more funds and money. But I think that's a really good point because realistically, what does that mean really for grades? How does it really then stand the test of time when like a 5'4" tall a female athlete, with a menstrual cycle, climbs, on a day where she doesn't feel really healthy or like she doesn't feel on top of her game, a route which probably has been done by someone who's like 6'2".
Yeah, yeah, difficulty can vary dramatically. So it's not always the case. I think often with like it kind of depends on the kind of rock and the type of movements. I think limestone sport climbs, for example, like your height often isn't all that relevant. Um, however, granite boulders are very morpho, so the shape of your body is important for the difficulty. Um, but yeah, so the difficulty of a climb can vary depending on like the shape of your body. So how should our grading scales handle that? And kind of currently, most grades just kind of ignore that. They take like just kind of one average, not average. It's actually the men are not the majority of climbers. If you look at the number of women and tall climbers and short climbers and youth climbers and para climbers, if you look at all those climbers, like, it's kind of like healthy, like average male morphology is not the majority whatsoever. It's a minority, but that's kind of taken as the standard. And it's not like anyone's intended this. It's not like there's some kind of evil group of like guidebook authors who are trying to make grades solely accurate for them. But kind of given the contribution of this particular group to the sport, you get grades that are kind of like fine tuned for accuracy for them. And it sucks if, I don't know, anyone who's climbed with someone who's like, 5'4", or I'm going to use feet and inches. That's what I know. If you climb with a shorter climber, you've seen the look on their face when they like can't do a climb that should be well within their ability given the grade, just because it's not that great for them. It's demoralizing. And I often think about the beginning climbers. You get this like a man and a woman start climbing together, and the man gets better way faster than the woman, and that's just kind of like every climber knows how like much of a bummer that is. And it's not because the man is actually better. It's because the grading scale is made for them.
Grades don't seem to move that much. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think that grades don't move much. It's complicated socially. So even as somebody who thinks about these issues and cares about these issues and wants grades to be accurate for everybody, not just people like me, it's still actually quite a difficult thing to do. So there's kind of a benchmarking effect from the first ascensionist, that first proposed grade. It takes a lot of evidence to change it. I don't think it necessarily needs to be this way, but this is just how it tends to be. I think also, when I'm out writing a guidebook and talking to people about grades, I often find myself around more men than women. And when I ask women about what grade they think it should be, I find them to be less likely to disagree with me. I don't have like clear answers for why this is the case, but I do know that as somebody who cares about this issue, there's not an obvious answer. I am a proponent of personal grades, not because I think that the grade is up to you. So everyone says that grades are subjective. I disagree with that. I think there is a right answer. I just don't think that right answer is universal. I think it kind of depends on like the characteristics of your body. So there might be like a tall grade and a short grade, for example. If you're climbing cracks, like a small hand and big hand grade. So I think there's like a right answer for how hard a climb is. But grading is a really tricky like skill to develop. And if you haven't graded things before, you might not have thought about like how weird the practice is, where you climb something and then you have to abstract away from your own experiences, right? Because you've got your specific like strength to weaknesses, but you have to kind of average those out some. You've got to like take the weather into account. If it's not perfect weather, then you have to assume it will be easier. If it's a first ascent, I learned that people tend to like figure out better beta later on. And so when I do a first ascent, I usually take a grade off from what I think it is, not because I'm trying to sandbag, but because I've learned that future climbers will have an easier time doing it than I did because they were able to improve upon my process. And so the whole like act of grading is kind of like a fun, quirky little skill to develop. But it takes developing. And so I'm a fan of personal grades, not because I think the grade is up to everybody, but I think that that's how you develop your ability to grade, is by doing it and getting feedback and talking about it with people and learning that your grade, what you thought was, you were just really psyched sometimes. And maybe you're on an off day. And so what you thought the grade was, you were just wrong about it, even for someone who's like you.
It's a little bit comparing Kant to Kierkegaard, maybe. Like there's a rationale, and then there's this sort of a despair, or like a kind of like a divine interference. I would say that it's just part of the game, and for me, it's a way of like how we communicate in the climbing community as well, because that it gives us a way or a base to communicate. because then we have something to talk about. I know so many times at the crag or in the boulder field, you like go like, oh, the 6A, it was never 6A, man. Like, it was never V5. Felt like V6, to me. And it's kind of giving us at least a basis, to kind of like communicate about, like something which is achievable in your potential, I would say, in your current potential. Um, and I would leave it like this because, if I would start being all nitty gritty about it, I would get really grumpy. And because one of the things I do believe, and I'm just going to leave it by that, is that genetics play a massive part. And in a way, I remember this because, like some of the people I know who knew Wolfgang Gürlich by person, they said he had an incredible, genetically strong, he had incredible strong fingers, and the beating he was taking to the fingers were actually able to. So he comes from an area of sort of close to a farming area. Well, I don't want to say Güllich parents or grandparents were farmers, but
Hmm.
there is a point, I think, in regards to epigenetics and in genetics in general, that that makes a massive difference. If you have your good genetics.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I benefited from having a dad who was a climber, and he started me young, and so starting young is really helpful. But yeah, there's some element of like some people are just born to be amazing climbers. I was never. I mean, which is cool. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that even. I think it's rad. I think it's cool seeing someone who's just. I mean, I've like you introduced someone. I introduced one of my friends in high school to climbing, and he was climbing 511 on his second day, and I was like, wow, that's so impressive. It's also impressive the way that people have to work for it.
Both things are legit. I think what is really interesting as well, what I realized, because I come a little bit out of sport teaching and stuff, and people who have done a lot of other sports previously, especially gymnasts, are incredibly well prepared in regards to coordination skills and strength skills because they've done their, let's say, basic or groundwork when they were like young, and then for them climbing is just like, it's kind of something you do because they've done so many pull-ups or they've done rings and stuff. And I mean, obviously, looking at the history of John Gill, this is how the guy trained because he was a gymnast.
Yeah, I mean, talking about grading, right? So in the US, at least, there was this moment when it wasn't clear that difficulty grades were going to be the way that we thought about climbs. John Gill came from a gymnast background. He wanted grades to have like a kind of an aesthetic element to it as well, where you judge not on whether the climb is done or not, but how cleanly the climb was executed. Um, Kind of like how gymnasts are judged in the Olympics, and that didn't end up winning out, but it could have, and it just shows it kind of opens for me at least. It opens my imagination to other ways that we could think about like grading rock climbs.
I guess from my perspective, if I see it like this, if something is hard for me and I really kick my ass, I feel happy about it, and I learned in the few years I've done this sport, like comparison will never get you anywhere because there's always going to be someone stronger or somebody who will kick your ass that day. And this whole my conflict was I came from competitive sports, I came from team sports, and that made it quite hard because I was in this competitive mindset. And I brought this sometimes, not all the time, but I brought it to the crag, and I didn't understand why I'm performing as good or better than other people. Because you cannot see, and this is the same thing when you do team sports, you cannot see the previous amount of work someone invested into that sport.
Yeah, it's I'm excuse me. I'm a little, I'm somewhat unique when it comes to people who criticize grades because I actually think grades are great. Many people want to criticize grades as like just feeding into the ego or corrupting the like essence of a sport, and I love those people. They're too pure for me. I grew up being a competitive climber. Like I like to compete. I like to know how people stack up with each other. I like to be better than other people. But of course, if I'm like having a better day than someone who's shorter than me, and it's just because I can reach to the crux and they can't. Like, there's no glory in that. And so that's
Another
kind of my
question.
motivation for making grades better. Actually, is to better able to like both for a climber to kind of judge themselves now versus at other times, and also between climbers. Like that kind of it feeds into that competitive part of my personality.
I have to say one of the best times I remember was when I was in Fontainebleau a few years back, and there was a group of women actually, and they were amazing. I mean, I couldn't believe that this whole male energy, or like whatever we socially construct, was kind of taken away. There was a massive amount of support, also safety support in a way, you know. And I was so lucky to kind of climb with a gang of female climbers there, because I just felt like this is way much more fun. You know, honestly, like there was not this dirt, you know, this trash talk going on, like on a kind of like, you know, because sometimes that can kind of tip, you know, you can give your partner kind of shit or in a group, but you know, with women, I mean, that's also in a way a construct, you know. But I felt like this was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm a proponent for inclusion in rock climbing. You know, when I started climbing, it was very like climbing in California in the 90s was very macho guy centered. Um, and I can have fun in that kind of like context for a little bit of time, but that's not my favorite group of people to climb with. I kind of got to like step in and then step out of that. And you couldn't do that in the past, but now you can. I go to the climbing gym, and it's just like so many people. You've got um, not just gender. I mean, right, men, women. You've got non-binary categories and comps now. You've got like POC climbing meetups. You've got queer climbing meetups. It's phenomenal. Like the sport, the kind of culture of the sport, I think is healthier, at least from my perspective now, than it ever has been. And a lot of it's because we just have a more kind of like interesting and diverse group of people who are doing it.
I think it's just it's a very nice way to kind of meet different people, you know, because it's like a leveling thing, you know, different age. I climb with people who are like 70. I climb with people who are like 20, and it's so cool.
Completely. Um, yeah. So kind of like, I mean, climbing has changed my life. And I value inclusion for that reason. Like I think it can change other people's lives for the better as well. But also I care about inclusion for myself. Like I'm also out here climbing, and I think about the kind of climbing community I want to be a part of. And it's going to be like a large, diverse, messy, wonderful group. That's what I want.
I had a discussion with Jackie Godov a few years back, and he said, you know, like he's so happy that more people come to the crag, because he saw it on the basis of like the more people enjoy themselves outside, the better it is, because people are actually using space outside. And I mean, what can you say against that? You know, it's like
Yeah, I agree. In the U.S., we kind of have like there's a component of like environmentalism that doesn't want people using the outdoor spaces, or not, rather it's usually not too many people because of the impacts on the environment, and that's real. You know, if you go to the buttermilks, like the erosion is pretty intense there. um, but the way I see it, you know, the biggest threat to the environment is not from users like us, it's from kind of corporate interests or government interests. And the more people you have who are kind of like personally devoted to climbing into a climbing area, the more people you have who will then step up to defend it when it needs that. There's proposed development at Mose Valley right now, so kind of an amazing bouldering area in the western U.S. And you know, because it's been a climbing area for so many decades, you have a large group of people who are willing to stand up and try to fight against that.
what can we do, you know, to make it more accessible?
Great question. You know, I had someone ask me this about route setting recently. Like, how do you get more women in route setting? Because you know, it's uh, in the U.S. only 13% of like the certified route setters who can set for the big competitions of women, and I think 13% might even be high if you look at kind of commercial route setters. So like your kind of route setter at your local gym, 13% women sounds pretty high for that. So how do you get more? How do you get people who are not already a large percentage of any group to then join? And the answers are, I mean, they're not easy. One is that you should make it inviting. Role models are important, get people of the groups you want to join in positions of power within the sport, so that if we had more women, more uh, POC climbers writing guidebooks, doing FAs, owning gyms. Very few women own gyms. Being head route setters, both at like your local gym and at national competitions. So in the U.S., there have been in the last since 2009, there have only been two major competitions. These are like the national, international level that have had a woman as a head setter, and it was the same one. This is Molly Beard. She's coming back again, but only two in what is that? Almost 15 years. So putting like women POC climbers in positions of authority, positions of power to then help make all those kind of small, subtle changes, that would be really helpful. And I tend to be an optimistic person, uh, so I do think that's happening, but it's not a fast process.
No, I guess any kind of societal change, takes a while, and it takes also the openness for people in power to step back or just to give these spaces. I mean, I think Nina Williams, did you just get voted in to become the president or like running the? Is it the Alpine Club?
American Alpine Club,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean that's
American
that's
Alpine
that's
Club,
so cool because she's young, she's an amazing climber, and I need to get on the show to talk about that shit.
yeah.
What as a philosopher, as a person who teaches, are there any aspects of like certain philosophers or certain theories which you find appealing?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what philosophy does for me is it helps to make sense of like the parts of climbing that I think are really fun. So I'm the kind of person when I see a magic trick, I don't particularly like magicians because they kind of weird me out. But when I see a good trick, I want to know how it's done because I can then appreciate the mastery behind it as well as the performance. So all it does is add another layer of meaning to what I already saw. And I think of philosophy as the same way. So before you mentioned like the kinds of like friendships you form at the crag. Um, uh, uh, that's a huge part of climbing for people is the way that it brings others together. And why does it do that? And I always think of Confucius. So Confucius believed that rituals are a tool for living a good life. And there's like a ritual of climbing with a group of people. And what it does is it kind of allows for connections that you wouldn't be if you were to meet those people on the street corner or at a restaurant, there's no way you'd be able to connect with them on the level you can while climbing together. And so, like, philosophy can explain parts of climbing that are maybe not mysterious exactly, but you might not have the like conceptual or theoretical framework to understand kind of how cool climbing actually is. I think thinking about climbing philosophically can kind of open up our minds to new sources of meaning. For example, I can get so focused on kind of like doing your climb, which is wonderful. Like I take nothing away from the like that elation from sending your project, but there's so many other sources of meaning within climbing. And when I look back at my the most impactful climbing moments of my life, very few of them are actually me climbing. It was friends. It was what we did on the rest days. It was the conversations while belaying. And so, doing kind of the philosophy of rock climbing can give us a more holistic picture of the actual role that climbing plays in our lives because it is so much, I think, grander than just climbing a rock, even though just climbing a rock is pretty rad.
Another thing I'm really interesting about it is why do you like doing climbing topos or climbing guides? What's appealing to you?
Well, for writing, why do I like to write guidebooks? There's a lot actually that I get out of it. So let me go through a list in my mind here. First, I like the creative aspect of it. There's this maybe idea that a climbing guidebook is just like a dutiful scribe kind of writing down work that other people have done, but really there's a lot that goes into it. Every word in a guidebook had to be written, and every map had to be drawn, and every photo had to be taken. And I like that whole process there of kind of starting with a blank page or a blank document, and eventually you craft this book that will allow other people to have like amazing experiences. And then I guess maybe the final part is being able to have an impact on like the development of climbing. I do like that, it kind of, I care less about climbing hard now compared to myself in the past. And so it's a way of me still like climbing and contributing to climbing that doesn't necessarily require me to be like in the gym pushing my limits constantly.
So it's just a different contribution to the sport and to the community in itself, though.
Yeah, it's a different way of doing climbing as documenting climbing for others.
I see it also like a transformation or a process of like, you explained this in your own life. It was for you when you started, you were well buoyed, or you were focused about ascent. And what I can see now is also like you're trying to give back, you're trying to get people into the sport, you're trying to make it accessible. And also you think about or you discuss with other people like how you can make it accessible